Mothman, the warning nobody understood. For 13 months, something seemed to watch the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Witnesses described a towering figure with a human-like shape, enormous wings, and eyes that burned red whenever light touched them. It appeared beside lonely roads. It moved through the abandoned remains of a military explosives plant. It followed cars through the darkness, keeping pace without seeming to flap its wings. And then, on December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed into the Ohio River. 46 people died. After the disaster, the strange wave of sightings largely came to an end. That sequence transformed an unexplained creature into an American legend. Mothman was no longer simply something frightening seen in the darkness. It became an omen, a presence associated with catastrophe. But omens create a difficult question. If Mothman appeared before the tragedy, was it responsible for what happened, or was it trying to warn people about a disaster nobody yet understood? The best-known chapter of the story began on the night of November 15, 1966. Two young couples were driving near the abandoned West Virginia Ordnance Works outside Point Pleasant. During the Second World War, the facility had been used to manufacture and store explosives. By 1966, much of it had been abandoned. Concrete bunkers sat among the woods and wetlands. Old industrial structures rose out of the darkness. Local people called it the TNT area. It was exactly the kind of landscape where modern folklore takes root. Isolated, decaying, partly reclaimed by nature, but still carrying the memory of what human beings once built there. Near an old power plant, the four witnesses reportedly saw a large gray figure. They described it as roughly shaped like a man but much larger, with wings folded against its back and two brilliant red eyes. The frightened couples drove away. According to their account, the creature followed them. It rose into the air and kept pace with their car, even as they accelerated toward Point Pleasant. They eventually reported the encounter to local authorities. The next day, the Point Pleasant Register published the story beneath a headline describing a man-sized bird, creature, or something that could not easily be named. The uncertainty is important. The witnesses did not arrive with a complete monster and a mythology already prepared. They were attempting to describe something for which they had no agreed category. Was it a bird, a person, an animal distorted by fear and darkness, or something that did not belong within any familiar category? The name Mothman came afterward. Once the story entered the newspapers, the creature gained an identity. Other reports followed. People described red lights in the darkness, enormous wings, strange movements, and a figure appearing near roads or around the TNT area. Some believed witnesses were seeing a large bird, perhaps a sandhill crane or another unfamiliar species. A tall crane observed at night could account for the long silhouette, broad wings, and eyes reflecting red in headlights. That explanation is possible. Fear can enlarge an animal. Darkness can erase ordinary details. Once a frightening story circulates, people may interpret every unusual shadow through the shape of that story. But that explanation does not completely settle the cultural question. Mothman matters not because everyone agrees on what the witnesses saw, but because the sightings became attached to what happened next. On December 15, 1967, Point Pleasant was crowded with evening and holiday traffic. Cars moved across the Silver Bridge, which connected West Virginia and Ohio above the Ohio River. At approximately 5 o'clock in the evening, the bridge suddenly failed. The roadway folded and fell into the river. Vehicles dropped with it. People on both sides watched an ordinary crossing become a mass casualty disaster within moments. 46 people were killed. 2 of their bodies were never recovered. The physical cause of the collapse was eventually established. A small crack had developed in a critical steel eye-bar within one of the bridge's suspension chains. Stress, corrosion, and metal fatigue allowed the flaw to grow over the bridge's lifetime. Because the design lacked sufficient redundancy, the failure of that single crucial component began a chain reaction the structure could not survive. Mothman did not physically break the Silver Bridge. The engineering explanation is real, detailed, and supported by the wreckage. The disaster also helped bring about major changes in bridge inspection and safety across the United States. But engineering answers how the bridge collapsed. It does not explain why Mothman became permanently connected to it. For that, we have to understand the function of an omen. Across mythology, an omen does not always create the event it predicts. A comet does not have to kill a king to be remembered as the sign of his death. A raven does not have to begin a battle to be associated with the bodies left behind. A dream does not have to cause a disaster to become meaningful after the disaster occurs. An omen exists on the boundary between cause and meaning. It appears before something terrible. Only afterward do people look back and wonder whether they had been warned. That is the role Mothman came to occupy. The creature was frightening, but the original stories do not present it as a conventional predator. It did not descend upon Point Pleasant and begin killing people. It did not tear apart homes or carry victims into the woods. It appeared, it followed, it watched, and then the bridge fell. If Mothman was a monster, its purpose is strangely unclear. If Mothman was a warning, however, its behavior becomes more understandable. The repeated appearances could be interpreted as attempts to draw attention toward an approaching disturbance. An alarm delivered in a language nobody knew how to read. That does not mean such a warning literally occurred. It means the warning interpretation gives the legend its emotional power. Human beings dislike disasters without intention. A hidden crack growing inside a steel component is terrifying, precisely because it has no face, no voice, and no moral purpose. It does not hate anyone. It does not select its victims. It simply remains unseen until the structure can no longer carry its weight. Mothman gives that invisible danger a body. Its enormous wings represent something hovering above the community. Its red eyes resemble warning lights. Its presence around roads and vehicles places it near the ordinary systems people trust every day. Most importantly, it is visible, but impossible to understand. That is what makes Mothman such a powerful modern myth. The creature represents the fear that warnings may already surround us, but we will recognize them only in retrospect. After a tragedy, people replay the past. They remember the strange sound, the overlooked crack, the unusual dream, the person who expressed concern, or the feeling that something was wrong. Details that once seemed unrelated suddenly form a pattern. This is not necessarily foolishness. Sometimes warning signs genuinely are ignored. Sometimes institutions dismiss risks because correcting them would be difficult or expensive. Sometimes people place their trust in systems whose most dangerous weaknesses cannot be seen from the surface. The Silver Bridge itself contained exactly that kind of hidden weakness. The crack was small. The consequences were enormous. In that sense, Mothman does not have to be a supernatural creature to tell the truth. Its legend tells us that catastrophe often begins quietly. The danger may exist long before the moment of collapse. The final disaster is only the instant when an invisible process becomes impossible to ignore. There is also a deeper tragedy in imagining Mothman as a messenger. A monster can be defeated. A warning can fail. If Mothman caused the bridge collapse, then the story gives us a villain. We can blame the creature for the lives lost. But if Mothman came to warn Point Pleasant, then the story becomes more painful. Something may have known disaster was approaching, Yet neither the witnesses nor the creature possessed a way to prevent it. The warning was seen, but not understood. That interpretation places Mothman beside older mythological figures who cross the boundary between worlds. It is neither completely animal nor human. It belongs neither entirely to the wilderness nor to civilization. It appears around an abandoned military-industrial landscape, then becomes associated with the failure of another human structure. Mothman lives between categories. That makes it a fitting messenger between what is known and what remains hidden. Over time, Point Pleasant transformed its frightening visitor into part of the town's identity. Mothman became the subject of books, films, festivals, artwork, and tourism. A creature once associated with panic became a cultural symbol. That transformation does not erase the victims of the Silver Bridge disaster. The bridge collapse was a real human tragedy, and the people who died should never be reduced to background characters in a monster story. The legend should be handled with that distinction intact. The bridge fell because a critical structural component failed. Mothman became important because human beings needed to understand what it meant to live beside a disaster that had been developing invisibly. So, was Mothman the cause of the tragedy? There is no credible evidence that it was. Was Mothman a literal supernatural warning? There is no way to prove that either. But within the mythology, Mothman works far better as the warning than as the destroyer. It is the red light nobody could translate. The shadow that appeared before the structure failed. The shape given to the terrible possibility that danger can announce itself without explaining what is coming. And perhaps that is why Mothman remains with us. The creature is frightening, but it is not the most frightening thing in the story. The most frightening thing is that a warning can stand directly in front of us and still arrive too early to be understood. Monster was never necessarily the figure in the sky. The monster was the disaster approaching beneath everyone's feet.